Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning to everyone.
Good morning, Prof.
Hi,
Morning,
Fatia.
Prof.
Hi, Nabila. So how's everyone this morning? Okay? Hope you're all doing well. Let's just wait a couple minutes. Let's let everybody get online. Okay, so welcome to week 2 of our class. So this week, inshallah, we'll have our first full class. Last week, we just had the mostly just the introduction to the class. And so today we will actually be getting into the content, the course content for the first time. So, and thank you for those who, I see most of you did the learning exercise, the learning style exercise. So thank you for that. And it was very informative for me. I learned quite a bit about you, at least your learning style. It's interesting to see the trends. Over the years, with each semester, the different responses I get to that survey, because each group seems to be a bit different, although most students nowadays seem to be mostly visual learners. Okay, most of you are visual learners, but many of you, as the survey showed, that there was a combination. You sort of there were several there's several kinesthetic learners, which are people that learn by doing, learn by experience, by doing. And then several were listeners. You like to learn also by listening. So a combination is usually what you find. So nobody is has a pure learning style. We're all of us prefer actually a combination of styles. But in that survey just gives us a sense of which of those we prefer, which is our preferred learning style. So when it comes to online courses, it's a challenge because we have to try to design our courses to meet the needs of all of our students, all of the learning styles in the class. And that's a challenge because with online learning, there's limitations in terms of how you connect with each other and how you interact. So on that note, for today's class, as I mentioned last week, I'm going to try not to do a lot of lecturing during this semester. Most weeks we'll have a little bit of lecturing. Of course, there'll be some lecturing. Today probably would be the most, I think, out of any of the courses, any of the classes, perhaps because I'm going to try and cover 2 short topics today. And so we might do a little bit more, but they're not very long. The slide presentation is not very long. And then we're going to do some exercises. And what I want to do with this group, because you guys are you're mostly semester 6 students, and so you're older, you're more mature. So I'm gonna usually reserve some of the class time for you to work independently. So most classes will probably stop our group work, our group activity, usually after maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours, and then in a lot of the weeks, I'm going to give you some exercises to do based on the content of the class for that week, which you can use the class time to work on, or you can do it during the week before the next class. And so I leave that to you. It's really your decision. But of course, if I leave you extra time in the class, it only makes sense that you make use of that time to work on the exercises. Okay. So, but at the same time, as I said, I will leave that to you in terms of how you manage your time. Okay. So also today, I'm going to give you, hopefully at the end of the class, I'm going to give you a case study to work on. And it's up on the Puja Blast. Let me go to Puja Blast and I'll show that to you. All right, can you see the Puja Blast screen?
Yes.
Yes, bro.
Okay, great. Okay, so here's week 2. So just a first reminder to please sign the attendance list. Okay, click on the attendance link. All right, we try to remind you every week of that because a lot of students tend to forget. And then just to let you know, I'm planning on week 8 to show a movie, which everybody loves movies, right? I don't know if you've heard of this movie. Have any of you seen this movie called The Boy Who Inherited the Wind? It's actually I think it's a Netflix movie, but have you seen that? Anyone in the class?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
Yeah, it's a really excellent movie based on a true story. Takes place in Africa. But in terms of, it's really about a boy who he's really a remarkable boy, and he does a lot of things for his community, his village. He grows up in a very, of course, very poor village in Africa, and they're facing a lot of challenges, environmental challenges, political challenges. And so he helps really save his village. But from a community development perspective, it's I think a very good case study in a lot of ways. So inshallah, we're gonna watch that movie if I can get a hold of it. I have to try, but for week 8, we'll be watching that movie, and then there'll be some, some work, some questions or exercises attached to that movie. Okay, just to let you know. That's the latest update. Other than that, today's class, as I mentioned, we'll start on our first topic, okay, which we're going to look at indicators of development, okay, and then we're going to have another short topic on principles and objectives of community development. That's really the introduction to community development, but that'll be just the first part of that lecture, not the whole lecture, okay. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to have a case study exercise. Now, for those of you who had me in youth development, you'll remember the case study of the Gaia Island Youth Association. Okay, and so that's a very good case study of an actual Malaysian youth association from Sabah. Okay, for those of you who are not did not have me last time, and so we wrote up a case study on that about that youth association called Basuga, Baliasugan Gaia Island. Okay. Now, when in my youth development class, we used that case study as a case study on youth development, but since it's also a story of community development, we're also going to look at it in this class as a case study on community development, okay? So as you can see on the screen, I've got all the links are here, but I've also included these files in the folders down below. Okay, so you'll find them here. Anyway, and so the case study, I've attached it, okay? You can just click on the link, all right? And as you can see, it's a little bit long. It's about 19 pages, okay? Now, one of the things I also want to do in this class this semester is, again, since you guys are older, oh, my screen's not open. It's not opening. Why is it not opening? Hold on. Let's try that again. All right, it's not opening from the link. Maybe it is on yours. But I think it's in here in the case study folder. Yeah, there it is. Come on, open up. Okay, it's maybe it's my internet connection. All right, if any of you have Puja Blast open, maybe you can try right now just to see if it works. It should open. It opened before. I think it's just my internet connection. All right, so and then the case study, and then there's the questions. I have some questions afterwards. Now this is not going to take you very long. You're going to take you a little while to read, okay, and then you have a few questions. As it says here, upload your answers below in the assignments folder. So in the assignments folder, I added a link for you to just to upload your answers. Okay, I don't want long answers. I just want short answers. So within a page or two, at the most, you can answer these questions. All right. let me show you the questions just to let you know. Okay, so for example, after you, here's the question. So after you read the case study, I want you to answer these questions about the economic, socialization, political participation, and mutual support elements of community development. Okay, so there's very simple questions. Did economic development take place? If so, how? Did interaction, relationship building between members occur? If so, what contributed to it? Okay, so these are very short. You can answer these in just a few sentences each. Okay, 1 to 2 pages at the very most. So you can download this, and then you can just upload your answers either in a Word file, or you can even do the answers right here on the PowerPoint and upload that. All right, I don't really care as long as you upload the answers in some form. Okay, and so all the links are here, and then so you can find it. So upload your answers in the assignments. Okay, and then if you want to collaborate, with your classmates, feel free. You can do that. I don't care if you collaborate, or you can just do it on your own. It's up to you. All right. And so just do this before next week's class. Okay. And that'll be the first case study mini assignment. Now, these little assignments I give you, they're like homework assignments. The way I use them, as you can see from last week, I didn't include them in the formal assignments. Okay. These are like extra point assignments. So like if you do them regularly, you do them well, that will give you extra points at the end of the semester to make up for whatever, maybe you don't do well on the exam or something, on the final project. Okay, these little assignments will help you to make up some of those points. Okay, so I encourage you to do those. Okay, any questions about anything I've said so far? I don't know if I went too fast, but anything unclear? Well, everybody has cameras off today. Okay, sorry. Jian, did you want to say something? Jian, when Jian? No. Fikia, comment?
So far, so good, Prof.
Okay. Anyone else? Question?
Prof,
Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
If we do it with our classmates, we have to send it individually, right?
No, just one of you. Just write your names,
Oh,
just write both names on the top, and then you can just submit it that way.
okay, Prof. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things that as 6th semester students, you guys really need to be able to engage in critical reading. So I'm going to give you assignments like this where you have to read not long things, but papers, case studies, and stuff like that. I think it's really important that by this time in 6th semester, you are developing your critical reading skills. And that'll of course help you very much when you go out into the job market, into the world, especially when it comes to things like problem solving and stuff like that. Those are really important skills that you need to develop. So these kind of things I think will help, right? So we do hopefully less lecturing and more on these kinds of assignments and just small activities and exercises and stuff like that. Okay, all right, so let's just get going then with the first lecture. And like I said, I don't want to spend too much time on the lectures, but these first two topics are really just overview lectures, topics. Okay, so this first one is called Indicators of Development. Okay, so, oops, sorry. Okay, so when we talk about indicators of development, we need to understand, first of all, the way that development is usually talked about, the way development is usually conceptualized. Okay, so like in Malaysia, when we hear the word development, we almost always think of what? Now, of course, on your screen, you see many different indicators or sectors of development, okay? But think about in Malaysia, whenever you turn on the news or you read even on Facebook, or if you read the news on internet, whatever, whenever, especially policymakers, they talk about development, usually they're talking about what kind of development? Usually. Which type of development tends to get the most attention, especially in Malaysia?
Economy.
Yes. Who said that?
Farina.
Farina. Thank you, Farina. Very good. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. It's almost always, not almost always, I shouldn't say that, but a lot of times they're referring to economic development. Okay. So we tend to think that development is always about economics, right? And economics typically means wealth, right? So getting wealthier, getting richer, right? So we tend to then equate development with getting richer or wealthier, right? More materialistically. But development actually has many different dimensions, as you can see in the slide, okay? So development also means community. And that's what really our course is all about, community development, all right? And even this slide is actually not that accurate, because even within community development, we have all these other things as well, all right? So, but there's economics on the left, okay? So you see economics there. Okay, so we have economics here, and then social development, okay? We don't think much about social, even though social development is actually talked about quite a bit, especially when we talk about development of, the rural areas, right? Even though there's rural here is another one, okay? But social development, of course, is tied into all these other ones. So in the rural areas, okay, we talk about rural development, but rural development itself includes things like education, social development, economic development, okay? So these are sort of all interconnected in a lot of ways, okay? But social development, when we watch videos on Twitter or YouTube or something, and we see people like stopping at red lights and, engaging in road rage, right? Where they're screaming at each other and acting like, animals or whatever. That's definitely an indicator that social development is not happening. Okay. A negative indicator of social development. We're not developing socially. Our society is becoming less integrated, less harmonious. Okay. Like in Malaysia, we like to say harmonious society, right? We want to strive to have a harmonious society, but that's really what social development is all about. It's creating a harmonious country. And then infrastructure. Okay, what does infrastructure refer to? Can anybody tell me? What's infrastructure development? Infrastructure means what?
Maybe facility.
Yeah, okay. Jesse, what kind of facilities? Give an example.
School,
Community hall.
Yep, school.
Hospital.
Sorry, Shaz, I didn't hear you.
Hospital.
Your sound is a bit blurry. Can you say it again, slowly? Pelan-pelan sikit.
Hospital.
Can somebody help me? I couldn't really hear what she said.
hospital, sir.
Hospital.
Hospital, doctor.
Yes, thank you, Shaza. Thank you, Jesse. Yeah. Yes, hospitals, absolutely. Schools, hospitals, community halls. Now, infrastructure, and a really important part of infrastructure development is transportation, roads, highways. Now we have MRT, right? MRT is going right to UPM. Do you guys know that? We're going to have an MRT station right on campus in UPM, right behind the faculty, bioscience, right behind. So we can, from campus, we can go straight into KL on the MRT next year. Very nice. So that is a really important part of development, because if you've got really good infrastructure, then that means, economics can happen. Social development can happen. People can meet. People can go to school. People can move around. Okay. So it's a very important part of development. Industry development. We need to develop our industries, right? And not just bringing in foreign industries into Malaysia, but we need to develop our own industries, right? Malaysian industries. So hopefully you guys, many of you will go out into the world and become, and start your own industries, right? Malaysian born industries. And then agriculture, of course, is a big one, especially in a country like Malaysia. We have such a big agricultural sector, right? Palm oil, and so many other things, right? Rice, pedas. I mean, pedas. Not pedas. Beras, sorry, beras. So many different agricultural crops we have in Malaysia. And of course, we have the rural development, as I mentioned, rural development, which is linked to so many of these other ones. Okay, and then finally, education. So when it comes to development, education is a primary one, right? And for you guys in HRD, for all of us in HRD, we have to really prioritize education, right? Education, not just formal education, not just what you do in school, but also the education that you get outside of school, training, right? Non-formal education, informal education as well, all part of development. Okay, so when it comes to developing a community or developing society, you can see there's many different sectors, many different dimensions of development. Okay, and these are all really important. Okay, so my rule. Okay, so for me, the way I teach, my rule is anytime you have a question, just feel free to interrupt me. Okay, or you can use the chat box. Although my chat box is not open, so I may not see you. Oh, there's a chat box. Okay, so community hall, basic system. Okay, Siyang said basic system. Siyang, what do you mean by basic system?
Hi, Doctor. I'm Lisa. Call me Chris. I think basic system is including some the people will be using like hospital, school, and industry and park. I think this is some basic system for the people.
I see. Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Very good. So this is, yeah, the basic infrastructure. It's the it forms the foundation really of our physical community. Basically, everything we do in community that has a physical nature requires all this type of infrastructure. So yeah, it is a basic system. Good. Okay, economic development. So economic development, of course, is one of the major drivers of sort of overall development, or the development that we want to see in communities. Okay, so when it comes to indicators of development, this is a lecture on indicators of development. So there's many different indicators or signs or measures of economic development. Okay, so economic development refers to the changes in the country that involve increase in productivity. Okay, so when we talk about economic development, we're trying to increase the productivity of the economic productivity of the country, right? So we want people to be more productive in an economic sense. And that is what really drives one of the things that drives development, okay, even in communities. And so productivity itself is measured in many ways. Okay, so let's look at some of the ways that productivity is measured. The first one is called the GNI. Now, don't worry about these are just examples of indicators. This is not an economics class, so I'm not going to really grill you on these things, but just it's good to have an idea of what these things mean, because these are indicators as to whether things like the national economy are growing and stuff like that. Okay, so the GNI is the gross national income. Okay, gross national income. As you can see there on the slide, it refers to the total amount of money earned by a nation's people and businesses in a year. Okay, so how much did Malaysia as a country earn? If you take all the incomes of all the people in Malaysia and businesses as well, for 1 year, that is what you get with the gross national income. Okay, it's used to measure and track a nation's wealth from year to year. The number includes the great nation's gross domestic product, which we're going to talk about in a minute, plus the income it receives from overseas sources. So gross domestic product is what happens within the borders of Malaysia, within Malaysia itself. Okay. The gross national income, however, includes money coming from overseas. All right, so it's a bigger figure, it's a bigger number. So for example, Malaysians that work overseas and they send money back to their families, okay, that gets included in the gross national income, whereas it would not get included in the gross domestic product. Okay, so GNI is a bigger figure. Now, who can read that number there at the bottom of the screen? This number here. Can anybody read that for me? That's a big number. Wow, Malaysia looks like a really wealthy country. Look at that. In 1 year, the gross national income was, who wants to read it? Is it millions, billions, trillions? How much? Berapa? Tatao, you're not sure? Amirul, any idea? Okay, it's 966 what? Okay, I can see we're not a math class, clearly.
Is it billion, Prof?
Yes, yeah. Billion, 966 billion, 320 million, 937,000 ringgit. Okay, that's a lot. Actually says current international dollars. If that's dollars, then that's really, that's over $1 trillion. Okay, that's 1 year. So that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. And as you can see, up until 2018 at least, which we have figures for, the GNI is steadily increasing. Okay, so that means that Malaysia is growing. The wealth is growing. Now, 2020, because of the pandemic, of course, I'm sure it went down. It must have gone down. Okay, so that's GNI. Now, this one is GNI per capita, which means what? Anybody know what per capita means? This word here, per capita. Who knows what per capita means? Anyone? So you guys haven't studied much economics, I can see. Per capita means? You can see here, the answer is kind of down here. Right? Per capita, dollar value. Sorry, go ahead.
Per person.
Per person, yeah. That big number, 966 billion, okay, it's just divided by the population, okay? So it reflects the average income of a country's citizens, all right? So per person each year, so for 2018, the per person, or per capita, it's called per capita, international income was $30,000, which is about 2,500 per month USD. Okay, so that's per person. All right, so that's another indicator of development. Okay, and we can see when we look at the trend over time, we can see that this one is also increasing. Even though population is increasing, clearly, at least up until 2018, the per capita gross national income was also increasing. Okay, and so this is what they use to say, well, Malaysia is a middle income nation or a high income nation, right? It's a developing nation, or it's experiencing decreases in development, whatever. They use these types of indicators. Okay, now the GDP, here's a new one. GDP refers to the gross domestic product. So this is the amount that's the amount of income within the borders of Malaysia. All right. So you can see here, the total expenditures for all final goods and services produced within the country in a stipulated period of time. Okay, so this is not income. This is the amount equivalent of the all the goods and services produced within the country. All right. So the GDP, you'll hear this one quite often. They talk about GDP quite a lot. Was 358 billion in 2018. Okay, so it's considerably less than the GNI, because why? Why is the GDP less than the GNI? Who can tell me? The GNI was 966 billion. GDP is only 358 billion. Why is it much less?
It doesn't include the overseas income.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Thank you, Nabila. It's exactly, it doesn't include all the overseas inflows into Malaysia. Okay, which means that there's actually a lot of money that comes from overseas into the country. Okay. And so that's why the thing like COVID-19, the pandemic, has another reason why it has such a huge impact on the economy of the country. It's because a lot of the importing and exporting decreases a lot, has decreased a lot during the pandemic, right? And so that really also affects the economy. Okay, so development. All right, so these are some of the indicators of development. So that's economic development. Okay, now when we talk about things like social development, we're talking about quality of life. Okay, so things that are changes that occur in a population that involve improvement of quality of life. Okay, so better health, better education, okay, and better social integration. These are some of the major ones that they use. Okay, so since 2020, social development has decreased in Malaysia. It's decreased throughout the world. Why? Obviously, because of COVID-19. Okay, clearly, health has been affected, education has been affected, and social integration has been affected. Okay, so if these are our three main indicators, they're not the only indicators, but these are our three major indicators of social development. We can see since COVID-19 has hit, social development has been seriously affected. Okay, and that may explain, at least partially, why so many people now, especially young people like yourselves, are having things like mental health issues, right? And so forth, because of these things. We're doing a study, UPM is involved in a study on, we're developing a new, helping the state government of Selangor develop a new youth policy, state youth policy. So Dr. Murshid, myself, Prof. Ismi, we're all involved in this project. And when we interviewed and did focus groups with young people in Malaysia, in Selangor State, many of them really talked a lot about the issues with mental health around young people since COVID-19. Okay, it's a big issue. But one of the things that we found, which was quite interesting, is that mental health is very much related to all these other things. Mental health is very much related to your physical health. It's very much related to your diet. It's very much related to your spiritual sense of well-being, right? It's very much related to your relationships that you have, social integration, right? So that's why a lot of people that are feeling extremely isolated during COVID-19, they experience mental health issues because of the lack of social interaction and integration. Okay, so you can see why COVID-19 would have such an effect on social development, all right? These three indicators. Okay, when it comes to health, here are some of the indicators that are used to look at health. So you can see here on the top, life expectancy at birth. Okay, so since, and this data only goes to 2015, but as you can see, the life expectancy of Malaysians, at least until 2015, I don't know about the most recent data, I don't know if we have the recent data, but you can see the life expectancy has been rising every year. Okay, so for, as you can see the graph here, for females, for women, the life expectancy is 77 years. Wow, right? For men, it's only 72 years. Why would that be? Now, all of these are going up slightly, still increasing. Okay, they're still increasing slightly, but there's such a big difference. 5 years. Women are expected in Malaysia to live 5 years longer than men. Why do we think, anyone have any idea why that might be? Stress. Amirul, come on, you're a man. Why don't we live as long as women? What's going on? We don't need feminism, we need masculinism. Feminism, women are doing better than men. What do you guys think?
Prof,
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it is because male are more exposed to a lot of risks rather than women.
Okay. Such as? What kind of risks, Fakim?
Dangerous works.
Okay. More dangerous work, more physical labor, right?
Yes.
Okay, that could be a factor, definitely. That could definitely be a factor. Good one. Anyone else? What other possible reasons could there be for women to live longer? That we can even, I mean, reasons that we can even identify. Of course, there's many reasons that we cannot identify. Only Allah knows the reasons for those, but for the social related ones, the ones that we can identify. So Fiqh mentioned nature of work. That could definitely be one. Also, just that maybe because of the nature of work, over many years, all that accumulated hard work, of course, maybe takes a toll on their life expectancy. So that's definitely a possibility. Nowadays, I think one would definitely just be general health, right? I think men are more at risk for certain diseases, right? So heart disease, for example. I'm not sure about diabetes. I haven't seen the research on diabetes, but I know it's, at least in terms of heart disease, men are more risk of getting heart attacks and strokes and stuff like that. So definitely certain lifestyle diseases, what they call civilizational diseases, those types of things, lifestyle diseases are definitely, I think, higher for men, at least some of the big ones. So that would also be a possible reason. Okay, so, and there may be others that we're just not aware of. Okay, now mortality means what? Mortality rate. You guys know what a mortality rate is? What does a mortality rate refer to?
Death rate.
Yeah, thank you. He says a death rate, basically the rate at which people die. So the mortality rate in 2018 for under 5 mortality rate. So those children under 5 that died. So this is one of the indicators that they use to determine the health of a country. It's a health indicator. So the under 5 mortality rate. Okay, and as we can see, since 2016, in Malaysia, it's gone down. Okay, so there's a downward trend, which is good. All right, it means less children, less than 5 out of 1,000 are dying. Okay, so you see the rate is going down. So that's a good indicator of development. That means that the overall health of the population, at least in terms of mortality rate, is better, is increasing, it's getting better. Okay, so it's interesting though, if you look at the trend, so it's sort of like plateaued here, then went up slightly and plateaued here, and now it's sort of on its way down again. It would be interesting to see since the past 2 years with COVID and everything, it would be interesting to see what's happened since then, which we don't have the data there for. Anyway, so these are just some of the core, sort of popular main indicators of health when it comes to development, country development. Now, this one is on education, and one of the common indicators of education in a country is literacy rate. Okay, literacy rate. So do you guys know what literacy rate means? What does literacy rate refer to?
Is it the ability to read?
Exactly. Thank you, Fikir. So it's the ability of adult citizens, people have, and here you can see 15 and over, their ability to read. Okay, so you're considered literate if you have a basic ability to read. And I'm not exactly sure what they use as the standard for reading, whether it's like grade 5 or grade 6 or something, but there is a common standard there. Now you can see this is very recent data. I just got this recently. So, and as you can see, the literacy rate in Malaysia is very high, right? So in terms of education, basic education now, we're talking about basic, because literacy refers to basic education. Malaysia does very well. And so you can see, since this is, I think, up until 2017 data, you can see there's a slight dip here at the end. I think between 2016 and 2017, it decreased slightly, but it's over 95%. You see here, 95, right? And so at the peak, it was over 95%, which is really fantastic for Malaysia to have such a high literacy rate. And that's among the top in the world. Malaysia is towards the top in terms of literacy rate. Right? So that's really fantastic. If you look at some of the poorer countries in the world, those in Africa, Middle East, and so forth, they have literacy rates in the some in the 50-60% range. So in some of those countries, even half the population still cannot read. It's quite sad. And this is, of course, a direct relationship with development of a country, right? If your people are not literate, if they cannot read, if they cannot have do basic, basic sort of literacy skills are not there, of course, it's going to be very hard for the country to develop. Okay. And so again, for HRD, thinking about the importance of developing people, right? It's really an important indicator, literacy rate. Okay, so in terms of education. So these are just examples. These are not all the indicators, obviously. When it comes to education, there's many more examples of indicators. Of course, when it gets to higher education, that's another indicator. So what percentage of the population has bachelor's degrees, for example, and stuff like that. So there are other indicators, but these are the basic ones. These are the basic indicators. When it comes to social integration, of course, we know that this is always a big issue in Malaysia. It's something that we're always striving to improve on, right? So we have, because of the nature of Malaysian society, right? We have our ethnic and religious and cultural diversity. We have our urban and rural areas, and we also have our east and west states in the country. So that makes social integration a very big issue and very big challenge, right? I mean, just look at the diversity that Malaysia has. Right? You can see it here in the faces of, of you all, and myself included, right? Bumi Putih, we're part of Malaysia too. Okay, so it is a very diverse country. So social integration, no one should take it for granted. We should not think that it's easy to achieve social integration. There are many countries in the world that have very homogeneous populations. For example, 95% white or something like that, and they even have problem with social integration. Like if you look at what's happening in the United States, my country, the U.S., I mean, white people comprise about 70 to 75% of the country, but they have right now huge issues with social integration with minority populations like Latinos and African Americans and stuff like that. There's big problems there now, and that's a country with, which is a much more homogeneous country than Malaysia. So Malaysians should never take for granted social integration. It is hard to do. It is hard to do. And I think overall, generally speaking, as a visitor, I've been here for 20 years. I think Malaysia does a very good job. I mean, you've done a fantastic job in a lot of ways in achieving the level of social integration that you have, right? But it's not easy, and there's always going to be challenges, right? And it's hard work. You really have to keep working at it, And so we should never take that for granted. But that is another aspect of development. Because if your country is not at least, socially integrated to the extent that it can live in peace and the economy can develop and function and so forth, it's going to be very hard for your country to develop. So social integration is critical for development, okay, critical for development. And then we have, of course, infrastructure development, as we mentioned. So you see there trains, buildings, subways, and sort of short range train services, highways, right? All the things that you mentioned. Okay. See, we didn't talk about electricity and water supply. Oops. Yeah, that's a really important one. Okay. No electricity, no water, we are in big trouble. We can't develop without electricity and water. Okay. So infrastructure also includes these basic amenities, electricity and water supply. I once did an interview with the CEO of Tenaga, and this is several years ago. He's no longer there. It's a new CEO, but he's very funny. He said, nobody thinks about Tenaga until the lights go out. In other words, we always take for granted, right, that we have electricity all the time, right? If you look at a picture of Africa at nighttime, the whole continent, Africa, you'll notice that 80% of Africa is still dark, which is amazing if you think about that. In the year 2021, 80% of Africa still has no electricity. Right? So these are the things that we take for granted. We really take for granted the fact that we have electricity and clean water and stuff like that. Only when they go off and when we don't have them, we go, oh my God, So when it comes to a country's development as a whole, infrastructure is absolutely critical. Okay, it's directly related to changes in economic and social development. Right. So there's a direct relationship between Africa's struggles to develop as a region, and their lack of infrastructure. Okay, lack of infrastructure. And we have many students from Africa in UPM, actually, graduate students mostly. And they tell us about, the challenges that they face there. Just in terms of just getting around, just transportation, basic transportation. It's very hard just to move, just to go from place to place. Okay, so infrastructure development is very important. And this is why, especially when Malaysia was in its, the period of the 1980s, 1990s, early 2000s, when Malaysia was really trying to develop its infrastructure, there was such a push to do it, right? Especially when Tun Mahathir was the prime minister for the first time, he was constantly pushing, that need for development in terms of infrastructure in the country, because without that infrastructure, you cannot really have strong economic and social development, right? So very important. All right, industrial development, okay. Moving on to industrial. So looking at the different changes in industries. Okay, so we have manufacturing, electrical, electronic, small and medium industry, SMIs, high-tech industry, downstream industries, agro-based industry. So there's a lot of industry, a lot of industrial development that takes place. And these are all indicators of development. And this is important for what? Employment. Okay, and contribution to the, actually, this should say GDP, not GNP. The term GNP doesn't really get used anymore. They use GDP now, gross domestic product, not gross national product. Okay. And so again, this is industrial development is very closely tied to economic development. Okay. And now there's, I don't know if you've been reading the news recently, but now there's this a bit of an issue with Malaysia's direct foreign investments have gone way down the past year or two, right? And so of course it's become a political issue. The politicians are making a big issue out of it, but in terms of industrial development of the country and economic development of the country, it's definitely meaningful, okay? Because first of all, what is FDMI? Foreign direct investment, FDI. Can anybody tell me what that is? Do you know what that is? What is foreign direct investment? Today is your economics class. I'm teaching economics in class today. So, but don't worry, we won't do too much of this during the semester, just today. It's just important to understand indicators, and many of these are related to economics. What is direct foreign investment or foreign direct investment? So when the politicians are arguing about, FDI being way down and others saying that, well, we're only accepting foreign investments from high income or high tech industries and stuff like that. What does that mean? And why is it so important? You want to guess? You hear me? Hello? Nobody? You're gonna make me answer the question? Maybe I should call on people. Do you guys like when teachers call on you? When a lecturer is calling you in class?
I'm not sure, Prof.
Okay, that's fine. As long as at least you answered. Anyone else? No? So you have,
is it
sorry, go ahead.
is it related to export and import?
Yeah, absolutely. It has to do, well, direct foreign investment has to do with overseas companies setting up their operations in Malaysia. Okay, so they're investing money. That's why it's called foreign direct investment. They're investing money not only to build factories and offices and all that, but they're investing money to hire Malaysians to work. Okay, so they bring a new factory, for example, right? So first of all, they're producing right? They're producing in Malaysia, they're producing new products, and that contributes to the GDP, to the GDP of the country. It produces to the economic output of the country. But then it also means usually employing Malaysians. So it means more jobs. All right, it means more jobs. So many of you guys are going to graduate and go and work in foreign companies. Without those companies coming to Malaysia and investing and setting up their shop or setting up their industry in Malaysia, which is called foreign direct investment, you won't have jobs. You see, so it's actually very important. Now, of course, it's even more important for Malaysians to have local industries, right? Malaysian run industries, but foreign direct investment is also important, okay? Because often they
Bob,
provide
I
a
want to
lot of
ask a question.
high-paying jobs. Go ahead.
Is it foreign direct investment? Is it a way of colonizing?
Well, that's a very good question. That's a very good question. And that's the argument that some people will make, you know. Like if you look at Singapore, Singapore is almost entirely comprised of foreign companies, right? So, and of course, Singapore is extremely small. It's a very, very small country. So it's hard for them to have their own, you know, but that's one of the reasons why Singapore is so wealthy as a country, because they've opened their doors to all these foreign companies that come in and set up their, in some cases, even their headquarters are set up in Singapore, right? So there's just tons of foreign companies in Singapore. So that means less Singaporean companies, but in some ways, it also means more local companies, because what happens often is that, for example, say Nabila, you go and work for Microsoft. Okay, Microsoft comes and sets up a company, sets up a factory or a branch or an office in Malaysia. Okay, Microsoft is a foreign company, but you go, Nabila, you get hired by Microsoft. So Nabila, you work, say 15, 20 years for Microsoft, and you learn all these things about software development. So from your experience working in Microsoft, you then go and leave Microsoft and you set up your own company. Okay, because of the skills and the knowledge you learned from working in Singapore, now you're able to set up your own Malaysian-born company. Okay, so that is also one of the effects of foreign direct investment, is that it spurs local companies and local business by training and passing on knowledge to local people. All right, so that's another argument for why foreign direct investment is so important. And a lot of times those companies, they bring in like high technologies and stuff like that we don't have in Malaysia. So they introduce it to Malaysia, Malaysians learn those things, and then Malaysians go and set up their own companies with those technologies. So there's like a spillover effect, or it's not really downstreaming. I guess it could be considered downstream, but it's more like a spillover effect. And it can lead to more local industry. Okay, so that's one of the arguments for it. But what you're saying is definitely an argument against it, and that in some cases it does provide a sort of colonizing effect to some degree, you know. So that these are the arguments for and against. But yeah, it is definitely one of the arguments. Okay, agricultural development, very important. Okay, if you can't eat, then you cannot develop. Okay, seriously, food is of course of the highest priority. So having a robust agricultural industry is really important for development. I don't know if you guys remember, like 10 years ago, I remember in Malaysia, we had this paddy crisis where there was not enough beras, there was not enough paddy. There was a crisis with the supply of rice, you know, in the stores. And it's the only time, I've been here 20 years, it's the only time we had this happen, but it's somewhere around 10 years ago. And after that, the government said, okay, we cannot be so dependent on foreign imports of rice. We have to develop our rice industry, you know, the paddy industry, and we have to grow our own rice. We have to be self-sufficient in rice. Okay, but to this day, unfortunately, Malaysia is still not self-sufficient in rice. We still import a large amount of our rice. And so that was the argument. What happens is suddenly there's a food crisis, and all these countries that you import food from, they stop importing food to you. They stop exporting their food to you. What do? You starve. Your population literally starves. You can't feed yourselves, right? So agricultural development is very important, not only as a commodity that you can export to other countries for money, but also for at least providing a basic living for your own people. Okay, so And it includes many things. So agricultural commodities include palm oil, paddy, livestock, okay, ayam, daging, all that, seafood, forestry, fruits and vegetables. That's all considered agriculture. All right. Okay, so now, of course, technology is helping to make agricultural yields better, higher, and so forth. Okay, so we can get more yields out of our crops and so forth. All right, so it's a major, major contributor to economic development. And when you talk about community development specifically, the agricultural industry is very important, especially for the rural areas. In some of those rural areas, you know, they're completely dependent on agriculture. Fishing, for example. Malaysia, you're a peninsula, you have tons of fishing. You know, how many fishermen are there in Malaysia that depend on agriculture? Paddy farmers, how many paddy farmers do we have in Malaysia? You know, we have IM, lots of IM farms. They're not called factories. What are they called? I guess they're farms. IM, where they harvest IM. Okay, harvesting IM. So you have chicken. It's a big industry as well, right? So there's many. Of course, durian. Durian now is becoming a big export industry from Malaysia, exporting to China. Lots of durian. Okay, another big agricultural industry. Okay, so a major contributor to community and economic development. And of course, rural development comprises all those other things that go on in rural communities. Okay, but specifically it refers to the development of the agriculture of the rural areas. Okay, so that is often linked very closely to agricultural development. Yeah, rural development and agricultural development are often very closely linked. Okay, Felda is a great example. Felda. And if we look at the way Felda has developed over how many years now? 50 years, Felda at least. You know, you can look at the old pictures of the original Felda houses and everything, and look at Felda now today. You can see the amount of development that's taken place in Felda. Why? Because of things like the explosion of palm oil. Yeah, palm oil now is being exported everywhere all around the world. So because of that, that alone has helped Felda really develop. Okay. So rural development, economic development, community development, educational development, they're all interrelated. They're all interconnected. Okay, they're really not separate. Okay, it affects health, it affects infrastructure, everything. In fact, we've had foreign visitors from overseas come, and when they visit the Felda settlements, they're really amazed at how good the infrastructure is. And see, again, this is very good planning by the original planners of Felda at that time. You know, the policymakers at the time, when they developed Felda, they developed the infrastructure first. So they put in all the roads, all the water systems, all those things that you need to really do economics. So in terms of whether they're doing palm oil or they're doing rubber or whatever the crop is that they're growing, it doesn't matter because they have that infrastructure in place. So the infrastructure is what facilitates the economics. Okay. The rest is just growing the crops. But once you've grown the crops, then you have to process it, you have to transport it, all that work, right? And then people have to live there, right? So you need all that infrastructure to handle all the people living there as well. So rural development is really reliant on infrastructure development, okay? And that's why the issue of Sabah and Sarawak is so sensitive, right? You go to Sarawak and you find so many areas that they don't have basic roads, they don't have basic infrastructure. And that's why they cannot really develop economically, because they lack that infrastructure. No electricity, no water, no roads. How are they supposed to do business? How are they supposed to have economic activity? They can't. It's very hard. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why the issue of Sabah and Sarawak is so sensitive politically. Okay. All right, so let's just do a short exercise, take a break and take it from lecturing. Let's do a short exercise. That's the end of the the development indicators lecture. Now, I just want you to think about this question based on what I just presented, what we just discussed. If you could decide the most important indicators of well-being for Malaysia, which ones do you think are the most important and why? And are there any indicators that are missing from the ones that I presented? Is there anything that I missed in relation to development, important indicators of development? Have I missed anything, do you think? Okay, so you don't have to take 20 minutes. Don't worry about this. It's just an estimate. Okay, so just go ahead and think about it on your own, and then you can share your answers in a minute. Take a few minutes.
Prof, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, Prof. Okay, regarding the indicators of well-being of Malaysia, I think one of the most important indicators is the education development. For my reason why I choose education development is that the reason is because by having education, actually people will know what is good, what is right. They will know whether their health is in a good condition or not. I think that's all for my part.
Okay, thanks, Hadi. Sorry, Amirul, do you go by Amirul or Hadi? Which do you prefer to be called?
I think Hadi, okay, Prof. Hadi.
You have to think about it. Okay, okay, Hadi. Thank you for your answer, Hadi. And then also I saw, and I just opened the chat box. I apologize. I didn't have it open before. But you mentioned about investment in form of we control ownership in the business in other countries. So you're talking about Malaysians owning businesses in other countries. Is that what you were referring to there? In the chat box, you wrote that comment. Do you see the chat box? I missed it from before.
Yes, Prof. Just now regarding the foreign direct investment.
Right. Yeah, so that's a good example.
Is it the correct?
Yeah, it is. FDI also goes the other way. So Nabila, for example, Petronas works in how many countries? Lots of countries. Petronas works in many countries. And so for those countries, Petronas is direct foreign investment for them, right? Because Petronas goes in, especially like in Sudan, Kazakhstan, a lot of countries. Even in South America, Petronas works in many countries there. So they go in and they set up, for example, they do, they set up their oil operations or whatever, so they hire local workers, they source local products there for their operations and stuff like that. So they're investing in those countries, right? But of course, Malaysia is collecting a lot of the revenues, right, from the business, right? And so that's why, people say it's very important, direct foreign investment, because it works both ways. Malaysians can also invest in other countries, but yet reap the benefits, in terms of the revenue, the profit, and so forth. Okay, so back to Hadi's answer on education. Yeah, good answer. Education is absolutely critical. I guess maybe that's why you're in HRD, huh, Hadi? HRD, right? Because yeah, when you invest in people, and I also agree with you. I think, you know, investing in people is the best investment, because when you invest in people, you know, human beings are the most dynamic creatures. We can do amazing things. And that movie I'm going to show you, inshallah, in week 8 will really bring that. It'll really highlight that idea that, you know, one person can make such a huge difference on an entire community, right? So so education, yes, and that's why we have to be very serious about education. We cannot play with education. We cannot politicize education. It's too important. It's too important for the well-being of the whole country to make it like a, you know, political issue. So Farhana said, I think most important indicator is social, because there are the people of Malaysia that manage the country. Okay. Social development, because why, Farhana? I didn't understand your reason there. There are the people of Malaysia that manage the country. Farhana, could you explain that a bit more?
Can I speak in Bahasa Melayu?
Of course, you don't have to ask me that. You can just speak, just go.
Okay, so the explanation is like social is very important in the country, in Malaysia, because what I think is it is like like
Nak cakap bahasa boleh?
orang Malaysia,
Nah.
orang Malaysia yang uruskan Malaysia.
Yeah.
Uruskan negara Malaysia. Dan sosial ni macam contoh dalam satu kawasan dia kena ada peringkat sosial dia. Contohnya ketua kampung, orang kampung, orang yang duduk dalam kawasan tu.
Right.
Malaysia terbentuk adalah sebab people in the country.
Right.
Dia terbentuk. That's what I mean.
Okay, yeah, that's a good reason. I mean, it's true. If you can't socially manage your country, if you cannot if socially you don't have that integration, you don't have that harmony, then yeah, it's impossible to manage anything, right? So I think that's if I understood you correctly, I think that is a good rationale, right? It's also very important, and you can see what happens when the social sort of fabric starts to break down. You know, you have everything else is hurt. You know, it's hard to have a strong economy if people can't even work together and get along, right? If they can't work together and so forth, it's very hard to have a robust economy. So yeah, social development is very important. I agree. Okay, and somebody, I can't see the name here. What was that name? Oh, Shaza said, Prof, for me, the most important indicator is economic. Economic is like our source of profit to continue growing. So without good economic, it is difficult for people to continue growth. With good economic, maybe all others indicators consistently grow. Yeah, well, that's the argument. Sure, I mean, that is one of the arguments for the importance of economic development. Is that, I mean, at its very basic level, economic development provides people with their basic needs, right? So if you think in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right, you can't do anything if those basic needs are not met, right? Basic needs. So people have to have food on the table, they have to have a roof over their heads, kena pakai, baju. They have to have those basics. Without that, really nothing else can be done. So an economic development ideally is going to do that. It's going to help everybody at least meet their basic needs, and then hopefully, in addition to that, the only thing about that is there's concern that there's oftentimes too much emphasis placed only on economics at the expense of the other things, right? And that's a danger. You have to be careful of that. The missing indicator, I think, is technology development. Whoa, very good. Thank you, Shaza. As we know that nowadays technology plays an important role. So yeah, that is an excellent observation. I did not talk about, although I did I touched on it in terms of, I think, agriculture development. But that's specifically within the realm of agriculture. But generally speaking, yeah, technology development as its own indicator is, you can make a good argument for that. I mean, you could definitely make a good argument for that. So good, very nice observation, Shaza. Good observation. And it's true. It plays a central role in the lives of everyone now, pretty much, right? Li Yang said, in my opinion, education is very important. The development of each country cannot do without the help of talent. Yeah, exactly. Talent. Talented people are what makes things work. Only by fully popularizing education can we make the country have more developmental opportunities. Okay, yeah, very good observation, Li Yang. And Shazwani said, Shara Shazwani, I think most important thing here is infrastructure. Infrastructure helps the community to improve their work life and make them easy. Yeah, make their tasks easy. For example, the public transportation that been provided helps them. Yeah, in this, as I was saying before, economics and infrastructure go hand in hand. You cannot have a strong economy without a good infrastructure. And one of the things that's really funny is that when I have visitors from the US come, they always comment on how good Malaysia's infrastructure is. Say, well, we don't have, in the US, we don't have shopping malls like this. We don't have highways as nice as this, right? So that's good. Alhamdulillah. All right, good observations. So let's take a break, take a short break because we're, I guess, about halfway done. So time is 12:15. Can we take about a 10-minute break just to get off the computer and stretch and get something to drink?
Yes, Prof.
Okay, we'll come back in about 10 minutes. Thanks. Okay, Bismillah. Everyone back?
Yes, Prof.
Yes, Prof.
Okay. All right, so let's continue. As I said at the outset, I'm gonna switch now to the second short presentation, and then I'll try and finish up around 1, and then I'll give you the remaining hour to work on your case study. Again, I will leave it to you if you choose to use that hour to work on the case study. Of course, I encourage you to do that. If you want to do it on your own time, that's fine too, but I'm going to give you the option, okay? So make use of your time, whatever it is, to your benefit. All right, so let me now I'm going to switch to we're going to get into the basics of actually community development itself. Okay, so this first segment of the lecture, we're gonna look at some basic concepts. We touched on some of them last week actually. And so it's good just to have a good foundation, definitions of what we're talking about when we refer to community development. Okay, so last week I think I mentioned this one when we were talking about what is a community, right? And so there are different perspectives on what a community actually is. There's different ways of thinking about community, of defining community. Okay, so the first one is the sociological perspective. And typically we refer to a community in this way, all right? We refer to communities as groups of people in social interaction within a geographic area, okay? And having one or more additional commonalities. I should say commonalities, I apologize. All right, so it's typically within that geographic context, right? The geographic area, we often refer to as community, and then the group of people within that area. Okay, so neighborhoods, towns, parts of towns, if you will, like, kampong, village. These are all kind of references we usually make to communities. And so you have a territorial graphical area, okay, geographic area. You have social interaction between people, and then you have common ties. And we're going to get into this one a little bit more in a minute, okay? So there's different meanings to community. As a territorial unit or geographic unit, here we're talking about the actual physical place, usually. It's hard, sometimes these are hard to identify. It's not necessarily within a particular border, right? Like if you refer to your community where you grew up, and we're going to do that in a second, actually. How would you define that community? Would it be the town? Would it be the kampong? Would it be the city? What would it be? How would you define your community? Okay, and it's often this, again, it's often a cluster of people living within a geographic area. And so it's that area that determines the nature, type, or the identity of the community. Okay, so if you're talking about the UPM community, for example, right? Or maybe your college can be a community, right? The campus itself can be a community, right? Sri Serdang as a town can be a community, or Putrajaya as a city, or a precinct within Putrajaya, or a sub-precinct within Putrajaya. These can all be communities from the definition of community as a territorial or geographic unit, okay? So it has different connotations depending on who's using that term. Okay, so can you name the territorial community that you grew up in? Do you have a reference for it? In other words, is there a specific community that you can say, I grew up in this community, and you can name that community? If you do that, how would you identify your territorial community that you grew up in? Name your community. That's the name of the game. Name your community. So my community would be, I'll write in the chat box. My community, growing up where I lived in the US, I grew up about 45-minute trip outside of New York City. Okay, so New York is the biggest city in the US on the East Coast, and I grew up just outside of it, like 40 minutes. Okay, But my town, the actual town, it's a small town, only about 10,000 people, called Ramsey. Okay, so my community, I refer to as Ramsey. Okay, even though within my town, there were neighborhoods and different areas within the town, I still, when I think about my community, I would think about Ramsey, the town itself. Okay, so that's how I would identify my territorial community. How about you guys? How would you identify your territorial communities growing up? Saranda, where is Saranda, Farhana? I'm not familiar with Saranda.
Hulu Selangor.
Oh, you're a local, local girl. Okay, so is Saranda an actual town, or is it just a sort of part of that area?
It is not a town, but it developed.
Oh, into its own kind of community.
Yeah.
Ah, okay. All right, so you just refer to it as Saranda. Okay. Who else? Anyone else?
Prof.
Yeah.
Okay, for myself, I think my territorial community is Bertam.
Okay. And where is that?
Bertam in Pulau Pinang. Prof.
Oh, Penang. Oh, you're
Yeah.
island guy. Okay.
No, actually, I'm from the homeland.
Oh, the mainland, Penang.
Yeah, mainland, homeland.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Mainland.
Okay. So is your community a town, or is it just an area, or is it a village? How would you describe it? Oh, he didn't hear me. Okay, anybody else?
Prof.
Yeah, Fikia.
Mine is Kampung Bukit Kapar.
Oh, okay. Mana? Where is it?
In Klang, Selangor.
Oh, okay. Come on. So you would say your kampong is really your community. That kampong.
Yes.
Okay, very good. All right. Okay, so we have some examples. Villages, areas, towns. Okay, as I mentioned, there's many ways of defining a territorial community. Another way of looking or defining community is as a unit of social interaction. Okay, so, and this consists of two dimensions. One is a social group. Okay, so social groups have basic properties such as a body of members, collection of social roles and a set of norms. Okay, so as you can see there, an association of traders, a workers' union, student association, pasuma, these types of groups that have their own fixed body of members. So you can say I'm a member of that social group or that community. Okay, this is also another form of community. So pasuma itself can be a community. Okay, maybe there's so many different persatuan, both in UPM, outside UPM. Those are all communities, right? So these are social groups. So this is another way of looking at community. Okay, it's not. This has nothing to do with geographic. It's the membership, role, and norms that define that community. Okay. So, can you name a social group as a form of community that you belong to?
Pasuma.
Pasuma. Good example. Good example. Yeah. Yeah. Pasuma. Any others? Pasuma.
FETSA.
Which one? Oh, what's FETSA?
FETSA.
FETSA stands for what?
Faculty of Education and Studies Student Association.
Oh, you call it FETSA. Okay. All right, good. Shazwani, yes. So that's another one. Anything else other than a persatuan? Anything else other than an association? Maybe some of you belong to like the cat lovers of Malaysia or something. UPM student. Okay, so Farhana put UPM student. Do you think that would count as a community, a social group in this sense?
Not sure.
Do you feel like you are part of a community as a UPM student? Do UPM students have your own sort of norms, your own sort of, sort of like almost like a cult, like a separate subculture? Fan club, yeah, absolutely. Fan clubs are definitely communities. They have a very strong, actually, a very strong community aspect to them because of the fact that they have very distinct norms, even ways of communicating. They're similar to subcultures. If you remember from our youth development class, we talked about subcultures. A lot of, yeah, there's another way of definitely a community. Fan clubs are definitely communities because they're very tight, usually very, very tight knit, they speak the language of that fan of the, of who they are admiring and stuff like that. So yeah, fan club would definitely be. Any others? Football club, football fan club, the Chelsea club, MU club, right? What's MIA Sarawak UPM? Jesse, what's MIA Sarawak?
MIA Sarawak UPM is an association that specialized for Sarawak students. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so that would clearly, clearly be one because you have your own cultural norms and so forth. So definitely. Okay, so that's social group. Now, another one. Now, this is a little bit different. It's similar to social group, but it's not quite as well defined. Community has a network of interaction. Network of interaction. What does that mean? So any time or any place you have face-to-face or online encounter between two or more people, this can actually be considered a form of community. Okay, it's a much more informal type of community. Okay, because it is what they call here a chain of input-output relationships. Okay, so it could be based on financial contribution, physical resources, or labor force. So for example, a bank, which consists of people giving a service to a group of customers, right? Because there is this network of interaction. So we have all these networks of interaction. Okay, vertical and horizontal interaction. So vertical and horizontal interaction means people at the same level or people at different levels of, for example, power. So for example, lecturers and students, this class could be considered a network of interaction, right? We interact on a weekly basis, there's knowledge sharing, there's communication, right? We're sharing experiences and so forth, okay? And this is where, Farhana, this is where your example of UPM students, I'm not quite sure whether it would be considered a community as a social group or community as a network of interaction, right? Because again, within UPM students, you have all those different subgroups. Some of them are much more tightly defined, like for example, Pasuma. Pasuma is also UPM students, but it's got its own membership norms, etc. Right? Whereas UPM students is very big and broad, and I just don't know whether you consider it a social group or a network. I would say it's probably closer to a network of interaction. Okay, more than a social group. But who knows? These are not really, there's no real hard definitions of these things. Okay, so it's a much looser kind of interaction, but it's also considered a form of community. Right? It's a form of community. Now, can you think of an interaction network that you belong to? Actually, we all belong to many interaction networks. As long as we're social creatures and we're socializing with people, we belong to interaction networks. What would a family be? What kind of a community would a family be considered? So think of people that you interact on a regular basis, but you don't really share anything in terms of, you don't belong to the same group. You're not involved together in a real intimate way, but you have regular interaction with them. This would be part of your interaction network, right? And so it could be loosely defined as a community. Okay, so maybe this is a bit harder for you to identify. Okay, but anybody that you really interact with on a regular basis. All right, so I'll just move on. Okay, so the community as a psychocultural unit is the last one. So This one, of course, is very important because this one deals with some of our deepest ties that we share in life with others, and that has to do with religion, culture, values, etc. So, for example, religious groups are psychocultural units, right? So our Muslim community, our Christian community, our Buddhist community, those are all forms of community, right? That have to do with psychocultural, right? Religion, so forth. Okay, Miat Sarawak, okay, perfect example. This would be a psychocultural unit in addition to a social group. So the social group, Jesse, the social group there would be the actual persatuan. But what makes the set, but in addition, you have another sort of layer of community there, which is your psychocultural, the fact that you share that psychocultural commonality in terms of your culture, for example. Okay, so these are usually very strong types of community because of the fact that they share a common identity, cohesiveness in terms of language, beliefs, values, right, and so forth. Okay, so these are very deep types of communities, these types of religious and cultural communities. Okay, so all of us, at least in Malaysia, for the most part, most people can identify at least one psychocultural unit, okay, from either your religious background, your cultural background, whatnot. All right. So there are others who, even though they are part of that particular religious background, they don't feel necessarily that they are a part of that community. Maybe they don't identify with it very strongly, right? So it's not really a big part of their lives. Okay, so not all interpretations of community have the geographical dimension, okay, as we mentioned, right? So the international community of engineers, community of entrepreneurs, community of pensioners. Okay, again, these have nothing to do with geographics. Okay, nothing to do with geographics. All right, so that's important to remember. Okay, community is not solely about geographic location. The basic functions of community, and as we can see here, communities are very important to how we function as human beings. They have much to do with how healthy our societies are, how productive our societies are. Okay, so there's the economic element of community: production, distribution, consumption. Okay, so for example, your geographic community where you live, right? You go outside and you see people doing business. You see people selling things, people going to the office, going to work. People working from their homes. All that is part of community, the economic dimension of community, right? Maybe some of you feel that it's important that you support your local businesses, right? So, you try to buy as many of the things that you buy, but try to buy as many of them that you can from community-based businesses, right? Rather than traveling to KL to go to Parkson or the big shopping mall or whatever. You'd rather support the community-based business because you want to support your community, right? You want to support the economic functioning of your community. So you buy from the Kedai Rancit, next door, or you go out and you buy from the machi selling pisang goreng on the street, or, because you want to support the community economic development. Okay, so that's an important function of community. Socialization. Okay, so obviously there's the family, the neighborhood element, right? Non-formal education, informal education, right? That goes on in communities. If you have persatuan, community-based persatuan, right? So you may have residents associations and stuff like that. There's a lot of socialization. Not only that, but there's also a lot of informal and non-formal education that goes on from those types of community-based organizations. All right. So socialization is a very important function of community, right? We go out, we meet our neighbors, right? We may have family members that live in the same community. We have friends, people that we do activities with, recreational activities, biking clubs and so forth. All this is an important part of socialization. Okay, political, all right? There's the social control element of community, right? So again, you have rules, you have laws that govern the way communities function. Okay, so you have local politicians that are very much involved in community level political decisions and stuff like that. Okay, so there's a lot of politics at the local level. right? In communities, there's lots of politics, and not just those types of politics. There's other types of politics as well that go on within communities. You know, jockeying for positions in the neighborhood residents association, for example. And that is also tied to participation, right? So communities only really function well when you have voluntary participation by members, right? And some of the most active communities are those that, some of the most healthy communities are those where the people are the most active, right? And in fact, I think Malaysia, I don't know if they still do, they used to have this award every year that they give out, like for the best kampong, right? And stuff like that. And some of those awards are really amazing. Some of the community things that go on are really, people are so dedicated and so much involved in their communities there that the communities really thrive. They thrive. So participation by members is very important for healthy communities. And so this usually comes about in the form of voluntary associations. And other things, not only volunteer associations, but even things like the masjid or churches and stuff like that, religious organizations that are based in the community also do a lot of work in the community and so forth. And they provide that socialization aspect as well. Fikia asked in the chat, is a group of friends without common interests considered a social group? Excellent question. Very, very good question. And I see I noticed in the parentheses you put without common interests. Now my question to that would be, but if you are a group of friends, you must have some interests, common interests, right? Otherwise you wouldn't be friends with these people. Am I right, Fikia?
Yes, bro.
So what do you mean by without common interests?
Meaning that we don't we don't really have common, things that we like, just being friends.
Okay. Yeah, but I would still say it's a social group. Because it's much more intimate than a network, for example. You know, an interaction network is just people that you interact with, usually to do business or to have something have transaction, right? Like in this case, even a class, we can be just what we would call an interaction network. But a social group is a deeper kind of bond. And so I think a group of friends definitely would be considered a social group, a community as a social group. So yeah, it's a good question. Good question.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, so and then mutual support. All right. So of course, communities are very important for mutual support, welfare, health, environmental resources, just helping out one another, right? Somebody gets sick, your neighbor gets sick, you take them to the hospital, or they need, even elderly person living next door and they can't go to the store by themselves, so you go out and you buy them food, whatever. There's so many ways that communities help each other in terms of mutual support. Okay, so this is a very important function of community, right? It's all that care, concern, social interaction, and it often has a lot to do with families, right? With children and stuff like that. Different generations are often involved. Like a lot of young people, and I found this myself when I was like your age and a little bit older, and I was sort of moving around a lot. I was not really staying in one place for very long. It's really hard to get a sense of community when you're in that kind of a situation. When you're not married, you don't have family, you're moving around a lot, you're working a lot, right? You have that less commitment, that less sort of tie to community, right? It's a lot harder to be involved. Once you're sort of settled, you start to have family, then the role of community becomes even more important. Okay, but again, that's more of I'm speaking more about the geographic kind of community. Okay, so definition of community development, just to have a definition. The term community development has come into international usage to connote the processes that allows community residents to come together to plan, generate solutions, and take action. Okay, developing the evolution of social, economic, environmental, and cultural aspects of the community. Okay, So here, community development is really about the people coming together, right? And either generating solutions or taking action to develop the community. That's what the development. So community development is driven by the people. Okay, so we can talk about economics, we can talk about all these things, but at the heart of it, it's the people that make community development, right? And it's the coming together, the working together of people. Right? And so you could really look at any kind of community and you could sort of apply that definition. Right? Even if it's an online community, you know, Facebook community, coffee lovers of Malaysia, Facebook community, right? And in fact, I know I'm a member of that that community. And so, yeah, of course, there's a certain type of interaction that we have around our shared interest of coffee, right? Where to buy it, where to shop, where to get the best coffee, the cheapest coffee, where do you get coffee if you're in the middle of, you know, wherever, stuff like that. So it is a form of community, but again, it's about the people that come together to develop it, right? And to serve each other, to help each other, the members themselves grow and develop and so forth. So that's what community development is really all about. It's also, as you can see there, two additional definitions. It's also the process of assisting ordinary people to improve their own communities by undertaking collective action. So again, here's this idea of participation, people working together collectively to improve, to improve the community. Right. So it's really hard to do community development without this kind of collective action, people working together. Why do we have Persatuan? Why do you even have organizations and associations? It's to bring people together who have mutual interests. Okay, another definition, a social work method, which is directed towards achieving one or more of the following objectives. Okay, to satisfy the needs of the community, to create and maintain balance, to maintain a balance between the needs and the resources of the community. So this is interesting, needs and resources. Okay, so create a balance. So we said that all communities have resources, starting with the people. The people themselves are resources. But then if you look at, for example, a geographic community, every geographic community also has resources. It has infrastructure, may have natural resources, may have economic resources, may have a variety of different types of people living there with different skills, etc. Okay. And so balancing those needs, the needs of the people in the community, along with the resources in the community, is also another definition, a way of thinking about community development. Okay. How do we balance these two? Okay, just some additional on the definition. To provide the community with the opportunity to exploit its strengths and potential. Okay, so this has a lot to do with HRD here, right? HRD. So if you think of the organizations that you guys are going to be working in as communities, right? Your job as the HRD officer is to develop and exploit the strengths and the potential of those workers, right? For the betterment of the community, which is the organization you're going to be working in. Okay, so as HRD practitioners, you can think of your organizations as communities. How do we build up the community? Okay, how do we build up the people, right? Build up their knowledge, build up their skills, so that the community as a whole, the organization as a whole, can flourish. All right. So it's not. It says here not only to deal with social problems. Okay, it's not only to. So it's a lot of community development deals with addressing social problems, but it's not just social problems, right? It's also about building up strengths, building on strengths. Okay, to affect change in the community, all right, in group relations and the distribution of decision-making powers. So many communities are very democratic in the way they're run, right? So there's a lot of power sharing, they have elections, office holders, and stuff like that, right? So they want to distribute decision-making, right? Unless it's like the more traditional style where you have the Ketua Kampung, and a lot of rural areas, of course, the Ketua Kampung has a lot of power, right? So it's less democratic in that sense. Okay, so it does depend on the community as well. Okay, last slide. This is just a diagram This is taken from Phillips and Pittman. And they just give us a sort of a diagram of what the community development chain looks like, sort of. Okay, and so you have this community capacity building process, okay, where people come together and they act, right? They come together and they act for the betterment of the community, right? So then this leads to community participation, okay? And once you have community participation where people are involved in building that community, it leads to community development outcomes like taking action, all right? Community improvement, and you have a community that's more ready for development, right? And you also, with community participation, you also get economic development, okay? Creating and maintaining programs and mobilizing resources. And this is what leads to the economic development of the community. So you have job creation, increase in wealth, and an increase in standard of living. Okay, so this is looking at community development purely from an economic perspective. It's just one model. This is just one model from Phillips and Pittman. This is the way that they've sort of conceptualized the community development process, but again, focusing mostly on economic development. But here we see participation is critical. Again, anything related to community development has to involve participation of the members. Okay, so that is why a lot of efforts to build community from outside the community often don't work. They often don't work, right? Because it really requires members of the community themselves to take action and to take ownership of their own communities for those communities to flourish, okay, and to develop. Okay, so this is just, again, just one way of conceptualizing the process, focusing on the community, on the economics of it. Okay, so that's all I'm going to do for today. I want to stop there. We'll continue this next week. As I said, I didn't want to do too much, and I've already done 2 hours, so I'm going to leave. Are there any questions about anything so far? Is it all?
Prof.
Yes, Hadi.
Yeah, Prof. Just now that you said that in a village, what you call it, the outside hand will not be will not outside power or outside people will not yeah.
It's hard to develop.
Why do people in the village why what's the reason because of it?
Yeah, good question, Hadi. So what's interesting is that I've had this experience both in the US and in Malaysia, because I used to work for a community development NGO in the US, and then I've also done research here on communities as well. And it's really remarkable because even though the culture is very different, that element is the same. It's pretty much the same. Community development, of course, external parties like the government, for example, can play a role in community development. There's no question, even though they're coming from the outside. So for example, if they come in and they provide resources for the community, all right. But the community development, the process itself has to be led by the members of the community. Okay. What's really interesting about that is the psychology of communities is that oftentimes they feel threatened by external powers. So it's like somebody coming into your home, somebody walking into your home and telling you what to do. How would you feel if somebody walked in your house and said, "Hey, Hadi, clean up that, do this, make me dinner. You should paint your walls, fix the ceiling." You'd be like, "Who is this person? Who are you? What are you talking about?" It's the same thing with communities. A lot of people people who have a strong sense of ownership of those communities, they feel very protective. And they feel very threatened when external parties come in and start dictating things. So for example, in the US, I worked for this NGO, and we used to go into low-income communities and we used to try to facilitate them to empower themselves. So we didn't go in and just tell them what to do. We would go in and work with them to try and get them to decide on what was best for their communities. But we found that even that was really hard because they always felt threatened by us. These outsiders coming in, telling them what to do and stuff like that. So it is you can sort of use the analogy of a home, walking into somebody's home and then dictating to them what they should be doing and stuff like that. That is often the reaction you get with community development. Heidi, do you have a different experience or a different opinion about that?
I think for myself, my experience, maybe it's like what Prof said just now. Basically, if somebody who is unknown to us came to our house and asked us to do something that is not our priority, I think that is like what you call it, like what you call it, like making actually like
hard to embrace
I don't know how to explain. How to
Yeah,
explain.
it's hard to embrace
Yeah.
them. It's hard to, So that's often what happens, and that's why a lot of, sometimes you have government or sometimes even NGOs. They want to do good things. They want to help out communities, but oftentimes it doesn't work. It just doesn't work because of that outsider issue, that outsider problem. Okay, sorry. So Farhana asked about so this case study exercise. Just try and do it by next week, okay? By next week's class, and then we'll try and share some of your work in the class next week. Okay. Anything else, Hadi, or anyone else have any questions or comments? If not, then okay, great. Thanks, Hadi, for your comments. So we'll call it a day for the formal part of the class. You have an hour. Again, you can use it for the case study, or you can, do the case study later. It's up to you, but I will give you time in class to do it. So for the case study, I mean, just do it. I don't know. You can do it with. You want to do it with 3 of you as a group? That's fine. Up to 3. Okay, so you can do it by yourself. You can do it with a pair, a partner, or you can do it in a group of 3. That's fine. It doesn't really matter to me, as long as everybody kind of, make sure everybody, if you're in a group of 3 or 2, everybody should at least read the case study and then, chip in, discuss the answers and so forth. All right. So we good? Okay. So okay.
Okay, Prof.
Yes.
Okay.
Prof.
So inshallah, we'll see you all next week. Enjoy your lunch. Have a good break. Until next time.
Thank you, Prof.
Okay.
Thank you, Prof.
Bye.
Yeah. If there's any questions about the exercise, just WhatsApp me.
Thank you, Prof.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Alright.
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you, Prof.
Waalaikumsalam.
Happy